All right, that was a pretty good place to stop. Becca is here and we have our guest speakers. Woo! So we will get started actually pretty momentarily. So I'm just going to keep talking. Thank you everybody for joining. I know we've had some pretty good turnout so far, and a lot of people watching or can watch later for the recorded version. So appreciate everybody who's showing up today. And this will be recorded to watch later. Some quick Zoom etiquette. Everybody already seems 100% on top of it though, because everybody's cameras are off and they are already muted. So everybody seems to know how this works. So if you need a reminder, you can unmute yourself by finding the mute button in the bottom left hand of your screen. If you'd like to ask a question, you can unmute and ask during the presentation. If our presenters say it's all right, I see them nodding, so that should be fine. Or put it in a Q&A, and those, or not Q&A, but chat, and those will get answered as well. And if you're not sure where the chat is, you can move your mouse around and also find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. So yeah, I don't think I have much else to offer in the way of Zoom etiquette and getting us started. Becca, would you like to take the lead and get us started here?
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint. So yeah, today is the last of our presentations during this workshop. We're going to be covering nematodes, parasitic plants, and abiotic plant issues. So a quick outline of those. Once again, we're going to review the biology of each of those groups of organisms, looking at the common symptoms and signs, covering some examples, and then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two speakers, Dong Yu and Jose, if they want to unmute themselves and just share some information about themselves.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jose Solorzano. I'm from Honduras, and I'm doing my PhD in plant pathology, researching corn, tar spot specifically. So welcome to the program.
All right, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me well through my mask. My name is Dong Yu Kim. I'm a third-year graduate student with the Department of Plant Pathology. I'm originally from South Korea, but I've been doing research on the soybean cyst nematode, which is a major soybean pest here in Minnesota and the rest of the United States. And I'm looking into ways of controlling this nematode using beneficial soil fungi.
Awesome. Well, Dong Yu, if you want to go ahead and take over and continue with the nematode portion of the presentation.
Certainly. Let me try sharing my screen. And hopefully everybody can see the shared screen. All right, I'm getting thumbs up. That's great. All right, hello everybody. I'll do my best to explain everything as thoroughly as possible, but there may be some things that I neglect to touch on just because it's a topic, it's very much a field that I'm familiar with. So if at any point you need additional clarification on something I've said, please don't hesitate to send me a message or unmute yourself and ask yourself the question. All right, and with that, we'll dive just right into talking about nematodes. So if you're familiar with the term, you might have heard it in the context of animal or even human parasitology, but this bunch of nematodes are relevant to us in a different way because these nematodes parasitize plants. To give you a brief crash course on nematode biology, these are small, clear, aquatic roundworms. They are not related to the common garden worm, and their size ranges anywhere between 100 micrometers to up to a millimeter, which is about, I think, 1/26 of an inch. And even though there are some nematodes that do live in the rivers and oceans, they're just generically known as aquatic because wherever there is a hint of water present, these nematodes have been found. And this really is a testament to the diversity of nematoda as a group of organisms. Hundreds of thousands have been described taxonomically, but nematologists or scientists who study nematodes believe that there may be millions, tens of millions of nematodes out there that are just yet to be discovered and described. But of those a few hundred thousand nematodes that have been described, approximately 10% of them are plant parasitic nematodes. And how this portion of nematodes are able to live this sort of lifestyle is through the use of a stylet, which if you look at the micrograph on the right half of the screen towards where the, well, this is the tail, and towards the other end of the body where the head is, you'll see a tiny needle-like appendage tucked inside the nematode. That there is the stylet. It's essentially a syringe that the nematode uses to pierce and inject enzymes into its host cells. And then once these enzymes have done their thing, digesting the nutrients and altering the host, the nematode uses the same stylet to suck up nutrients back into itself. So plant parasitic nematodes are parasites, but they're also obligate parasites, meaning that they have to spend most of their life cycle, feeding off of its host, otherwise it's not able to sustain itself. And this sort of parasitism ranges from anywhere between a host specialization, in which the nematode can really only effectively survive off of a single host plant, versus those with extremely wide host range, such as different varieties of root knot nematodes, which we will touch on later, which can cause damage on thousands on host plant species. You may be, well, glad to know that plant parasitic nematodes, most of them are restrained to the soil environment. So if you do have nematode issues, you're most likely to find them in the soil surrounding your plants, and you'll most often observe damage to the root tissues. This same soil is where these nematodes will reproduce and live out all of its life. Well, except when it's buried in its host plant's roots, but that's another issue. And something very quirky about the nematodes is that some of these species can be very hardy, being able to just essentially dry up, curl up, and then whenever water is reintroduced to the soil, the nematode just rehydrates and comes back to life. This is more of an extreme case, but it's just really indicative of how hardy how difficult it is to deal with some of these plant parasitic nematodes. So with that out of the way, I'll move on to discussing some of the more common symptoms and signs of nematode infestation in your plots or greenhouse operations. So the common nematode symptoms, because although the nematode primarily spends its life in the underground setting, a lot of the more pronounced effects can be observed above ground. Unfortunately, the symptoms might not be as unique or dramatic as can be observed in other, say, fungal or bacterial diseases. But these symptoms, which can range in severity depending on the severity of the nematode infestation, include stunting and wilting. And as I once again have stated, because these nematodes live underground and their primary point of interaction with their host plant is through the roots, when you do dig up some of these symptomatic plants, you will be observing dark lesions into which the nematodes have buried into and caused cell damage in the root tissue. And depending on the nematode species that you're actually working with, some of them will cause very typical symptoms, such as these galls on this infected root sample. You'll also notice that the roots are stunted in growth, and this is because the nematode, as it feeds off of the nutrients of its host plant, essentially stops the plant from growing normally, growing to its full potential. So in addition to stunting above ground, you'll also see stunted growth below ground to affected plants. So we discussed the symptoms of nematodes. You might be asking, then how do we detect these nematodes? What are the signs of these nematodes? And for that, you will have to, it is very important to sample the soil or dirt that your plants are growing in. Once you've eliminated the usual suspects of fungi, bacteria, potentially even viruses, and maybe even nutritional imbalances, it's very important to sample the soil and actually observe the worms squirming around inside there. And then just observing these worms might sometimes even not be sufficient, because these worms, because nematodes are practically everywhere, you have to confirm that these nematodes are the plant parasitic ones that are causing you grief. And this is where the stylets, the needle-like structures that I discussed earlier, comes into, it is very important. Plant parasitic nematodes and a few handful of free-living nematodes living out in the wild are equipped with these stylets or stylet-like appendages. So if you see worms and if they have stylets in and around your affected plants, you know you have a nematode problem. And with that, I'll move on to some common examples or well-known examples of nematodes that may cause harm and yield loss in agricultural, horticultural, and greenhouse operations. Perhaps the most damaging is the root knot nematode, but namely the northern root knot nematode is most pertinent to us in Minnesota. The northern root knot nematode has an extremely wide host range that comprises hundreds of plant species that are fruits, grasses, vegetables, and weeds. And this nematode's feeding on the root tissues causes those symptomatic galls. And although these galls may just lead to stunting in some vegetables, particularly for those root vegetables, galling, as this is called, may cause a value reduction in your crop. And thus, root knot nematodes are very important to watch out for. Well, not just because they cause this sort of damage on your plants, but also because these root knot nematodes and a handful of other nematodes can survive the permafrost, the Minnesota permafrost, as eggs, or in some types of soils as juveniles through the anhydrobiosis, or life without water adaptation that they have gone through. But once these eggs and juveniles have survived these harsh conditions, they can be reintroduced into fields and gardens through infected planting stocks or infected contaminated soils. And you'll know that these root knot nematodes are there because plants very quickly will develop galling under roots, stunted development above and below ground. The yields will be reduced. There may be wilting if the population blows up out of control. There may be symptoms that resemble nutrient deficiency because the nematode is, of course, sucking the nutrients from the plant. And in very, very severe cases, especially if this nematode infestation is combined with other microbial infestations, plant death may occur. Management options are thankfully available for this and other nematodes, including crop rotations with resistant or non-host crops, although there are very few of those, controlling of weeds, off of which the root knot nematode can survive even when our plants of interest aren't growing, and the removal of infected plants. Next up, we have the lesion nematode, which, as its name suggests, causes lesions on the root system as it enters in and out, in and out, in and out of different feeding sites. This is one of the very few plant parasitic nematodes that is very active and will travel along the length of one root system and then move on to another plant. It just can't settle. This one. This lesion nematode also has a wide host range of over 400 plant species that includes potatoes, monocots, and fruits. The symptoms include those aforementioned necrotic lesions on the roots, from inside of which the lesion nematode will feed off the plant. This will lead to nutrient and water deficiency symptoms, diebacks, stunting, and general necrosis of the root systems. Management options for the lesion nematode include crop rotations, once again, checking whether your planting stock is clean of plant parasitic nematodes, controlling weeds, because once again, these plant parasitic nematodes with wide host ranges can survive even if your plant of interest isn't actively growing, and sanitizing tools, because like so many other plant diseases, nematodes can be easily picked up off of up on tools and then be transported to uninfested fields or soil. Thirdly, we have the stem and bulb nematode, which, as its name suggests, attacks the stem and bulbs of mostly onions and garlics, which you can see are just very disfigured following stem and bulb infestation. The stem and bulb nematode is also capable of infecting 450 and greater genera of plants, but is again particularly a problem for garlics, onions, and chives. These nematodes are also very hardy, as they may survive drought for many years, living in dry plant materials, and are introduced to uninfested soils via seed, plant debris, soil, and water. Symptoms, once again, are very, very similar to other nematode infestations, those generic yellow leaves, wilting, growth stunting, and in severe cases, diebacks. But for garlics, onions, and chives in particular, the distortion and the shriveling of bulbs is of particular interest. And management strategies for these two nematodes includes the sanitation of your tools as to prevent spread of the nematode to other uninfected soils, strategizing and limiting the movement of infected plants and soils, which involves checking your planting stocks, crop rotation with non-host plants and resistant plants, and weed control. All right, we're moving on to the pine wilt nematode, which is slightly different from the plant parasitic nematodes I've discussed so far, because these nematodes can travel up the plant through the trunk and into the leaves, where you can see it's caused just massive diebacks of the leaf. The pine wilt nematode infects a number of evergreen trees, and particularly those non-native pines, such as Austrian and Scotch pines that haven't naturally developed some sort of resistance against the pine wilt nematode. This death is can vary in speed from taking a few weeks to potentially even over a few months, as the stress of having this nematode moving through its system slowly kills off the pine tree. But of the trees, of those evergreen trees affected, those that are 10 years or older are most susceptible to this nematode. But then, in addition to being able to travel up the tree, the nematode is also transported between trees by the longhorned beetles. So this is one example of a nematode who transports largely depends on a vector insect. So yeah, but when this nematode does make its way into a host pine tree, symptoms will gradually develop, including the death of the pines from the top of the tree downwards, the brownish coloration of the tree as the leaves slowly die. But these interestingly enough, these needles don't fall off the tree; they do stay on. So it is a good indicator, I guess, that particular pine trees are affected by this nematode. Management for this nematode is fairly straightforward, with the removal of the infected trees to avoid further spread of this nematode by its vector, and planting resistant trees if you do have to introduce pine trees into a region where this nematode is essentially confirmed to be present. And last but not least, we have an exclusively above ground plant parasitic nematode, namely the foliar nematode, which is becoming much more of a relevant issue here in North America, as it was discovered in 2016. Well, it was described in 2016 and 2017 as causing foliar dieback in some like aesthetic trees. I believe on the West Coast, but I may be misremembering. But these foliar nematodes, they will start their life in the ground, but they have this amazing ability of climbing the length of the tree or the plant to the leaves through water channels, essentially on the surface of the plant, that it can swim upwards. But through this, the foliar nematode infects and causes symptoms in over 450 species of plants, including herbaceous ornamentals, woody ornamentals, fruits, and vegetables. The damage is rarely lethal, but if you are growing ornamental plants and these nematodes are crawling up into your leaves and causing cosmetic damage, you can see how this can become a problem really quickly. Thankfully, identification and management of this nematode isn't too tricky, as this nematode, once it burrows into the leaf through the bottom where there are natural breathing apparatuses for these leaves, the spread of these disease symptoms are restricted by the veins of the leaves, because the veins physically prevent the nematode from moving from one segment to another segment of the leaf. But once you've confirmed the presence of foliar nematodes, probably by crushing up these leaves and looking at them under a microscope, management options available for foliar nematodes includes the removal of infected plants, disinfecting tools that might have come in contact with diseased tissues, and avoiding planting susceptible hosts in the first place, and watering at the base of the plants so that the foliar nematode doesn't have this water channel to travel up to the leaves. All right, and this actually concludes my portion of this presentation. Hopefully I gave you a newfound, possibly appreciation of plant parasitic nematodes. And if you have any clarifying questions about what I've presented, I would very much appreciate it.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions about nematodes before Jose moves on? Barry?
Oh, hello, Barry. I believe you're muted.
Forgot.
I can hear you now.
You'd think after a year and a half I'd have that down. Um, if you suspect you've got a nematode problem, you need some type of microscope to really confirm it, I presume. Is that the case?
Yes.
Or,
Yes,
or, or where could a normal gardener go to get confirmation of this type of a problem? Like an urban gardener.
Yeah, the most immediate resource I believe I can point you to is the Plant Diagnostic Clinic here at the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. I believe they have online resources as well as a physical form that you can fill out and send in with various samples of your affected plants. And I believe, I can't quite quote the turnover rate yet, but they'll quickly diagnose your issue and come back to you with
Yeah.
that options.
Also, I'm curious about, is there any treatment being looked at of finding parasites on the parasite? Are there any other organisms that are unfriendly to nematodes that could be used in their control?
Yes, actually, that is an excellent question because it is exactly my field of study. So because nematodes are so prevalent in the environment, they've made a lot of enemies as well. Other nematodes, fungi, bacteria, other insects, animals, as a matter of fact, all of them will attack and consume nematodes throughout their lives. But industrially speaking, microbes are of particular interest because they're so much easier to handle and they can be mass produced. In addition to these microbes, there are also chemicals that these microbes secrete and have some sort of effect, some sort of stunting or killing effect on plant parasitic nematodes that are industrially being investigated.
How reliable can we count on regular nursery stock being free of nematodes? Is the nursery industry doing anything to keep nematodes from coming into my garden, or is it something I have to worry about like jumping worms?
Yeah. So for most plant parasitic nematodes, just because of how small they are and limited in mobility they are, typically you don't have to worry about nematodes taking over your neighborhood. They move very, very, very slowly because they are microscopic organisms. As for whether you can as for nematode-free planting stocks, unfortunately, it really is up to the providers of planting stocks to guarantee that their stocks are actually free of this parasite.
I will share a quick anecdote. The garlic bloat knot nematode, I think it's called. For garlic growers, it's a huge problem in Minnesota because garlic, they're spread through seed of like the actual bulb. And that's where the nematode hangs out. And so you don't want to exchange garlic bulbs with other growers as hobbyists in Minnesota or as like actual growers if it has a nematode. So there's new rules that were put in place in Minnesota among garlic growers that you have to actually send in a sample to our disease clinic and have it certified that it is nematode free before you can share it with others.
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, it is possible to get some that are nematode free. So I'm gonna quickly go to the chat. Dong-Yu, Ken asked if there are any chemical controls for nematodes.
Yeah, I believe I briefly touched on this, but I think I'll have to step back and briefly go over the history. I think I'm already closing towards the end of my time. Okay. Chemical control of nematodes initially began as this kill everything approach. So it's very potent fumigants, or so essentially gaseous chemicals, were pumped into the soil, kept in there for several hours, and then released. And that essentially killed anything and everything that could be a problem for plants in the soil. But what that led to is a giant hole in the ozone. So through a number of legislation and policy changes, the use of these sorts of chemicals has been pulled back. I believe there are still like very few like experimental exceptions to this use, but slowly people are moving towards more traditional control options like non-host crop rotation, and as I think I briefly mentioned earlier, industry and companies are actively trying to develop nematode-specific pesticides. So I'm not certain if there is any one chemical that they are marketing, but they do have microbe-derived products out there.
Mhm. And then one last one, and we'll go to Jose. Rotating susceptible crops with non-susceptible ones. Do the nematodes remain in the soil until another susceptible crop is planted there?
Yes, and well, I'll just say yes. I was about to say no, but unfortunately, more cases than not, even when you do plant non-susceptible crops into the soil, the nematode that's causing you issues will most likely survive, albeit in very small numbers, until susceptible crops are reintroduced. Ultimately, introducing non-susceptible crops to fields or greenhouse settings is a way to, well, fields especially, because soils, if they're confirmed infested in greenhouses, can be quickly purged. But out in the fields, the use of non-susceptible crops is a way to manage the population so that even if this nematode survives for however many planting seasons and does start to grow in population again with the reintroduction of a susceptible crop, it isn't in such a detrimental number. And it allows for the grower to grow the susceptible crop, which is more often than not the most profitable one, until the switch has to be made and the non-susceptible crop has to be planted. Hopefully that made sense. It's a dynamic.
So as a gardener, it will likely still be in your garden, but it won't cause as much damage likely when you return to that specific plant because there isn't as high of a population anymore.
Mhm.
Is that what okay. Gotcha.
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, Dong-Yu. And if you have any other questions for nematodes, just hold on to it for a few moments. And Jose is going to start with parasitic plants.
All right. Hello, everyone. So now you have learned about plants being affected by nematodes. However, plants can also be affected by other types of organisms, such as fungi, bacteria, viruses, but they can also be affected by other plants. And how do we call those plants that affect other plants? We call them parasitic plants. So parasitic plants are those that can or need to obtain their nutrients from other plants. How do they get to the plants? So sometimes the seeds or the structures of that plant arrive to a new plant, to a host, and they stick to the stem or the roots of the host plant. And from there, the parasitic plant takes advantage of the host, hijacking the system and obtaining all the nutrients and water without giving anything in return. So parasitic plants can be differentiated in two groups mainly, and those are hemiparasites and holoparasites. So hemiparasites are those that can produce chlorophyll, but depend on the host plant for water and nutrients. On the other hand, we have the holoparasites. The holoparasites depend on the host plant for water and nutrients, but the difference between the holoparasites and the hemiparasites is that holoparasites also, they need chlorophyll or photosynthesis products from their host, which means that they cannot produce photosynthesis or conduct photosynthesis. So I'm going to go over a few examples of these types of parasites. It's better looking at them than talking about them. So here are some examples. Number one is the leafy mistletoe. So this is not a problem in Minnesota, but it's considered a problem in the southern United States. So this parasite relies on the host for nutrients and water. And the signs are the structures of the plant parasites. What are the structures? You can observe the leaves of the plant parasite, and you can also observe the green stems of the parasite. And another characteristic structure of this parasite are the berries, these white berries that you can observe here. So the symptoms include reduced vigor and swelling at the site of infection. And the berries can be eaten by birds. So which means that the seeds of the plant parasite can be dispersed to other hosts, favoring the distribution of the plant parasite. How do you manage this? So the manage includes pruning, cutting infecting branches of the host, but also in early stages of the infection, you can also look at for the plant parasite. If you are able to remove it, you can remove it and just get rid of it before it starts taking over the trees. So this also, the leafy mistletoe is also known as true mistletoe and is oftentimes used as Christmas decoration and can easily seen in the winters on hardwoods without leaves, as you can see here in the picture on the bottom left. So another type of plant parasite is a dwarf mistletoe. And this is a characteristic plant parasite. It's a plant parasite of conifers, but can also be a problem of the black sprouts in northern Minnesota, and can also infect pines, sprouts, firs, cedar trees throughout the world. So the seeds have a slimy layer coat, and they stick to other plants. And they can be projected up to 50 feet away from their site of production. And from there, they infect other young plants. So the symptoms include these that you're observing here, which is known as the witch's broom. And you're seeing like, wow, like the leaves are only concentrated in this area. What is happening? So the plants defoliates aside from the witch's broom, which means that the plant will lose all the foliage in this area. And the pathogen or the plant parasite is only found here. So what is doing the pathogen? The pathogen is hijacking the system of the plant. So in order to obtain the energy and resources where only where the pathogen is found. So the plant parasite requires that the plant only produces chlorophyll and the nutrients in that area. So the management for this is removing infected trees, pruning branches, and cutting or burning large infected trees. So another characteristic plant parasite is dodder. Dodder is widespread and found almost everywhere. It's an annual parasitic plant that cannot live on its own. So which means that it needs another plant to live. So it infects many different species, including ornamentals, native plants, and weeds. So what is characteristic about this plant parasite is the orange, yellow-like stems. So it doesn't develop roots or leaves. So when you're trying to identify this plant parasite, what you can do is you can pull the plant, and if you don't see any roots, you'll say, okay, this is the plant parasite. But you will see that the stems are surrounding other plants. From using that surrounding the stem of the other plants is used by the pathogen or the plant parasite to extract the nutrients and water from their host. So it will rarely kill the plant, but it changes the natural growth of the plant. So the signs include the orange vines and the flowers, and the management includes early detection and removal using using seeds without dodder, and using also rotation, especially using monocots. Another characteristic thing of this plant parasite is that the seeds are really small, and the seeds can get mixed with other seeds. So when you buy seeds, you may have, so oftentimes, a mixed combination of dodder with your seeds. So you gotta be careful and try to like learn how to identify the seeds so you don't plant dodder in your garden. So plants can also be, so we have learned now that plants can be infected or can be affected by other organisms such as plants, and those plants are known as plant parasites. But plants can also be affected by non-living issues, and those living issues are considered as abiotic factors or disorders. And these are oftentimes misregarded as abiotic because they look alike as other the symptoms that you observe on the plants look alike as the symptoms caused by microorganisms or living organisms. So abiotic disorders are non-infection diseases caused by non-living issues. And the symptoms often look like symptoms caused by microorganisms. But the stress caused by these abiotic factors can lead to the infection of biotic diseases. For example, an abiotic factor can weaken a plant, so making it more susceptible for fungi or bacteria to attack the plant. So there are some specific elements or types of abiotic agents that are the more general abiotic agents, such as chemical, environmental, nutrients, air pollution, and injuries. So some example of those are herbicide exposure, excess of inadequate moisture or temperature, excess of inadequate supply of nutrients, and excess of poisonous gases and physical damage. So how do you get chemical damage or herbicide exposure? So when you're producing your plants in your garden, and oftentimes you need to get rid of your weeds that you don't want in your crop. So you start applying herbicides. And that herbicides can get volatile and reach your main crop. And in that way, you can affect your main crop. So the symptoms of the herbicide exposure includes leaf cupping, angular, chlorotic, and necrotic spots, and whole leaf necrosis. As you can see here in the image on the left, this plant is being affected by 2,4-D, which is a herbicide used to control broadleaf weeds. So in this case, perhaps someone was applying the herbicide to control the weeds, and the spray of the herbicide got volatile and reached the other plants, and that's why this tomato plant was affected. So 2,4-D, it's a herbicide well known for its potential to control weeds, and it has the ability to affect many other crops. So there are also products of human contamination that can affect plants, and one of those is ozone. Ozone is a product of nitrogen oxidizers and volatile organic compounds, product of solvents that get mixed, and in reaction with when they are exposed to sunlight, they react and produce the ozone gas. Ozone gas is one of the most widespread air pollutants. How do you distinguish the effect of ozone from other type of diseases? So ozone damages the plant by entering the stomata. The stomata are the pore-like structures that the plants have on the leaves. And from the stomata, the plant uses the stomata to do the interchange of gases, such as carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide and oxygen. But in this case, the ozone enters and damages those things and causing the oxidation or burning of the plant tissue during respiration. So the symptoms include these ones you're observing here on the pictures on the left, which are white, tan, purple, black, flecking, browsing, and bleached dead areas of the plant. So the symptoms are more severe on leaves exposed to direct sunlight because this reacts and enhances the respiration of the plant. So the requirement for respiration and the intake of ozone increases when the plants are exposed to sunlight. So how do you manage this disease? It's really difficult because the ozone is everywhere. So you need to have like really nice or really well air conditions to keep your plants or your crops away from ozone. So there are other factors also, such as the lack of nutrients. So how do you get to this disease? You may think, oh, that may be a fungi, but unless you don't see any structures of a fungi, that's not caused by a fungi. So blossom end rot is a common disease of tomato, but can also be found on other crops such as cucurbits or other soft crops such as melons as well. So the symptoms include rotting, necrosis, and on the bottom of the fruit, even though the top can look healthy. So you need to look at your tomatoes sometimes and see if in the bottom, on the bottom of the fruit, you observe this type of symptoms you're observing here in this picture. So how is this caused? This is caused by the inability of the plant to take up calcium during fruit development. So calcium is a nutrient that is really important and vital for the crop to develop the fruits. So the lack of this nutrient produces this type of symptoms on the fruits. So that also another thing is that the changes in the soil moisture. When the growing season starts dry and changes to wet, or starts wet and changes to dry, can also lead to appearance of this type of events, of the symptoms on the tomatoes. So also the excess of nitrogen can decrease the uptake of calcium by the plant and can lead to this type of disease. The injury in the roots also can affect the ability of the plant to uptake the calcium. So how do you manage this? The management with regular watering programs, you need to have a constant watering protocol. The lack of water can lead to this problem. The excess of water can lead to this problem. So you need to have a balance and follow the requirements for liquid in the plant. So applying mulch to keep the moisture in the soil. Correct fertilizer application. So you are in time with your application of fertilizers based on the need of your crop. If your crop is lacking calcium, you may see this type of symptoms on your fruits. So avoid the root injury as well when you're trying to clean the crop. You're doing manually or you're using any type of instruments to clean your crops. You need to avoid injuring the roots, because injuries are oftentimes also a problem. How do these injuries can become a problem? So the injuries are oftentimes used by other organisms as open doors for a disease to enter inside of the plant. So the mechanical injury leads to some types of disorders, and especially distress. When a plant is stressed, all the system of the plant is down, which makes the plants more susceptible to other types of organisms or favors disease and overall. So this tree was mechanically injured by a lawnmower, resulting in wounds in the tree trunk. So here in the bottom, more oftentimes people may say, like, this is a hardwood, making it like that small injury is not much. But this small injury can be the door for many and multiple diseases that can end with this tree in weeks or months. So wounds, you need to be on the lookout for avoiding these types of injuries, not only on trees, but on the small plants as well, when you're cleaning them or trying to remove weeds from your garden. Wounds allow the tree to be susceptible to insects and other pathogens. Another characteristic abiotic factor is overwatering the plants. So oftentimes we think water is necessary for the plants to live. But if we add too much water, remember that the soil can take only a specific amount of water. But in the soil, we also have pores, and those pores also have oxygen. And if we cover all those spaces in the soil with water, the plant will overdrown. Like there will not be oxygen available for the plant. And also by applying a lot of tons of water in the soil, we are telling the plant to absorb all the water, and the plant will become flaccid and soft, so the sun can affect it and can like lead to burning. So this inhibits the plant ability to intake food and oxygen, and allows plants to become susceptible to root-rotting pathogens, because the amount of water in the soil will make the soil a surface or a substrate rich for other pathogens that require a lot of moisture in the soil to attack the plant. So if you have a lot of moisture in the soil, you may have a lot of fungi, for example, surrounding the stem of your plant. And from there, you're gonna get diseases in your stem, which later will develop into a more severe disease. So overwatering is a big thing that you need to look at when you are trying to protect your crops. So allows the plant to become susceptible to root rotting, and the symptoms include limped, brown tips, root rot, blistering, defoliation, and stunting with yellow leaves. So we have learned that plants can be affected by other plants, and those plants are usually known as plant parasites, and that plants can also be affected by other non-living issues, such as drowning, injuries, and nutrient deficiencies, and other type of factors. So it is difficult to know exactly how to identify between when a plant is affected by a living organism and when they are infected or the diseases are caused by a non-living organism. So some tips to do that is that you need to look at and see how many plants are affected right now, which is if you have a plot of like 20 plants and only 2 are affected, perhaps you need to look at and see, number one, you need to look at and see if there is any type of fungi affecting your plant. If there is anything that doesn't look like a plant affecting your plant. So you say, okay, maybe this is caused by a non-living organism. So if you see that the disease is not spreading to other plants, maybe the disease is not caused by a living organism. So what is the pattern of the symptoms? That's another thing you need to look at. Have the symptoms spread from plant to plant? Usually fungi spread from one plant to another plant. When your plants are affected by water or by physical injuries, those symptoms from one plant will move to another plant. And you need to look out for signs of any pathogen, bacteria, fungi, insects, or anything else that can be affecting your plant. So with that, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Anybody have any questions for Jose or Dongyu? Not seeing anyone. Well, if there's no questions, we can end early today. I would like to thank Dongyu and Jose for speaking with us today. I also want to thank all of you for joining us. You know, I enjoyed this. I hope you all got something out of this. I know our graduate students really appreciated it and got something out of it as well. Hopefully, you know, eventually in the future, we can have this type of a workshop in person and, you know, get to hands-on workshop with some plant materials. But good luck with the rest of your growing seasons. Make sure to collect up all of your disease material for the next year, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you all.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.